You're watching Promethean Actions Weekly Class for April 26, 2025. This is Tony Pappert. Our speaker is Will Wirtz. Will the Trump administration introduce a new Bretton Woods world monetary system? As you'll hear, Treasury Secretary Bessent was discussing this in November and has made interventions since then, which are coherent with that. The chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, Steve Moran, wrote a study, I believe also during November, before becoming part of the administration, on a new Mar-a-Lago Accord, which was a restructuring of the international financial system. The name Mar-a-Lago Accord he took from the Plaza Accords and other features of the monetary negotiations of the 1970s. Will has worked for some decades on this issue, actually. He was a close associate of Lyndon LaRouche from the 1970s and worked with LaRouche on this particular issue of a new Bretton Woods in the late 1990s and pushed forward on this in the teens of the present century, including after Lyndon LaRouche's death. So with, as I say, no further ado, let me bring on Will Wirtz.
Hi, Tony.
I will.
So, as Tony just reported, there's a lot of discussion that's going on in respect to a new Bretton Woods Accord. And in particular, this started back during President Trump's first term in office. There were a number of reports that were put forward calling for a new Bretton Woods system. Could you pull up the picture of R. Brenner, please? This is a report that was written on May 20th, 2017, toward a new Bretton Woods agreement by an individual called, I think it's Reuven Brenner. Then the second slide of Judy Shelton. She wrote the case for a new international monetary system in the summer of 2018. She is someone who was actually proposed for the Federal Reserve System by President Trump, although she didn't gain approval at the time. So these two articles in 2017, 2018, the beginning of President Trump's first term in office, were putting forward the idea of a new Bretton Woods financial system. In both of these cases, they were advocating a return to fixed exchange rates, reversing the policy which began in 1971-72, when George Shultz in particular pushed for a floating exchange rate, following Richard Nixon's decision to decouple the dollar from the gold reserve system, which had been an essential part of the original Bretton Woods system. So this discussion was initiated during the first term of President Trump, and you will remember that or I'll just remind you, the Republican Party platform in 2016 included Glass-Steagall, which was legislation put forward by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to distinguish between investment in real production versus speculative investment. And also President Trump in 2016-17 was talking very much about what he referred to as the American model of political economy, citing Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, McKinley, among others, something which he has continued to do when he campaigned for president again in 2024 and won the election. Can you bring up the next slide? And also, Tony, I've lost contact with the Zoom. I don't actually see. I'm not sure what to do about that.
You've minimized your screen. Find your screen at the bottom and bring it back up. I mean, you're fine. You're
Okay.
visible. You're everything. It's just that.
Okay, there it is. Okay, fine. Sorry. Okay, I have it now. So in August of 2018, I wrote a proposal based on Lyndon LaRouche's concept of a four-power agreement between the United States, Russia, India, and China to create a new Bretton Woods system. And this proposal was sent. I had been president of the Schiller Institute for nearly 27 years. And so I wrote it as president. I was president. I wrote it as president of the Schiller Institute. It was sent in the name of the founder of the Schiller Institute to the three presidents: President Trump, President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia, and Prime Minister Modi of India. And of course, all four are still in power today. This proposal is reproduced in an expanded version in chapter 12 of my book, which I wrote in 2023, Beware the British East India Company. But in 2018, a number of other things occurred. One was that we produced a book called The Four Powers. Can you bring that up, please? This is a book written, which included writings of Lyndon LaRouche on the New Bretton Woods system. It included the preface, which was a speech that I gave in New York City on September 1st, 2018. And there were a number of presentations that were made in 2018 in order to try to push this idea forward. That it's essentially an idea that you have to have these four powers, which are diverse countries, working together if you're going to have lasting peace and if you're going to have a stable world credit system. And that these four powers would have the ability to finally dismantle the Anglo-Dutch imperial financial system, which has dominated the world with only a few exceptions, including Roosevelt's initial conception of Bretton Woods, which, as I said, was abandoned by Nixon in 1971. So this was a concerted campaign on the part of the LaRouche movement in 2018, intersecting these other proposals, which I just mentioned. And in a certain sense, it is only because of the effects of the Russian hoax directed against President Trump and then the COVID epidemic from China that it became impossible for President Trump to actually act on such a proposal. And now we're in a situation with his current term in office in which this issue is back on the front burner. Could you show the next picture, please? This is the book that I wrote in 2023, which emphasizes that the alternative to the Anglo-Dutch imperial system is the American system of Hamilton, of Friedrich List, of Henry C. Carey, Lincoln, McKinley. And although it may shock people, also Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose great-great-grandfather on the paternal side, Isaac Roosevelt, worked closely with Hamilton. And in the late 1920s, before he decided to run for president, Franklin Roosevelt actually wrote an article on Alexander Hamilton, which clearly showed that Hamilton was the individual that inspired him in his presidency. Can you show the next items? Now, since President Trump has taken office, there has been an increased level of discussion of bringing into existence a new Bretton Woods system. And this discussion is at the highest levels of the administration. Scott Bessent has stated in November of 2024, before becoming Secretary of the Treasury, we're in the middle of a Bretton Woods realignment. I'd like to be part of it. And once President Trump initiated his reciprocal tariff proposal, which is an American system policy, a number of people, including Steve Moran, who is now chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, recognize that, as Moran said, we may be on the cusp of a generational change in the international trade and financial system. Chamath, is an influential blogger who has interviewed both. I think he's interviewed Scott Bessent, has said that his best view is that Trump brings everyone to Mar-a-Lago to put, quote, an offer on the table, Bretton Woods 2. So what I'm showing you right here is a speech that Scott Bessent gave to the Institute of International Finance. And this follows interviews that he gave, other interviews that he gave, one to Chamath and one to Tucker Carlson. I'll just mention, let's see. In the interview with Chamath, what Bessent emphasized was that the American dream is not based on cheap goods, which of course is what we've had as we've hollowed out our manufacturing and outsourced jobs to China. We've gotten so-called cheap goods through cheap labor, and that meant less skilled jobs in the United States and a destruction of our manufacturing capability. So what Bessent said is that we want to get prices down, real wages up for working people. The emphasis is upon Main Street, not Wall Street. He said we have to reorder the trading system, bring manufacturing back to the U.S., and use such means as tariffs, low taxes, deregulation, and cheap energy to achieve that. In his Tucker Carlson interview, Bessent said the original tariff man was Alexander Hamilton. Yes, and he used tariffs to fund the new nation and to protect American industry. President Trump has added a third leg to the stool. He uses tariffs to negotiate. And I think that's actually quite key, because what President Trump is doing with the tariffs is not only attempting to reorder the trade system internationally, so that we can become a manufacturing superpower once again, and we have fair and reciprocal trade agreements with all nations throughout the world. But he's using his announcement to negotiate, I believe, something much bigger. That is a new Bretton Woods system. And what Bessent said on Tucker Carlson's show was, we're going to reindustrialize. That the problem is that we stopped making things. We stopped, we don't make our own medicine, semiconductors, ships. And he said, it's now Main Street's turn. Then in this speech, Scott Bessent made a number of remarks which are quite important, because what he made it very clear that this administration is not going along with the idea of climate change as being the policy which dictates the destruction of the world economy, and of course the tariff policy makes it clear we're not going along with Adam Smith's free trade policy. We're using American system method of protectionism. And so what Besson says in this speech is that we have to reconnect the institutions of the original Bretton Woods system, the World Bank and the IMF, with their founding mission. He said, America first does not mean America alone. That what we must do is deepen cooperation and mutual respect among trade partners and restore fairness to international economic system. This is very important because he's not operating on a policy which is just anti-Chinese, for instance. He's operating on a policy which Lyndon LaRouche would call a Treaty of Westphalia policy, that you have to, if you really want to achieve something of significance in the world, what you have to do is internalize what are the actual interests of other nations as well, and what can you do to help them. And Scott Besson actually says that China has an export surplus, which they have as to the detriment of the United States and other nations throughout the world. But they're in trouble as well. And Besson's view is, what can we do to help them? And you know that President Trump also says that he wants to arrive at a deal with China. He respects President Xi. We have different systems, that's true. And China has taken advantage of globalization and free trade policies over the last decades. But nonetheless, President Trump wants to make a deal with China, which is beneficial to China in the long run, as well as the United States and the rest of the world. What Besson says is that the status quo is not sustainable. Then he goes on to make the point that by sustainable, he's not referring to green sustainability. He says, I'm not talking about climate change or carbon footprints. And he says that the Bretton Woods institutions must step back from their current unfocused agenda, which is a disproportionate devotion of time and resources on climate change, gender, and social issues. He emphasized there has to be a focus on increasing energy access throughout the world. And by that, he means that you don't focus just on what he calls distortionary climate finance targets, which is what's taken over both the IMF and the World Bank. But rather, what you should emphasize is investing in gas and other fossil fuels. And then he goes on to praise the World Bank for announcing that it will seek to remove prohibitions on the support of nuclear energy. So I think in this speech, he makes it very clear that they do not see the World Bank and the IMF actually operating on the original principles of the Bretton Woods system. They want them to return to the mission that was established for them under Roosevelt's Bretton Woods, and they want to reject all of the policies of climate change and the British policy of which is a Malthusian policy after Thomas Malthus, and the free trade policies of Adam Smith. And of course, as you know, in his first administration, President Trump withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Treaty, and he has indicated that he intends to do that this time as well, to withdraw from the Paris Climate Treaty as not solid science whatsoever. And it should also be noted that in March of this year, President Trump stopped funding of the World Trade Organization, which is pushing free trade and which benefits, in particular, China, which is regarded as a developing nation, even though it's the second largest economy in the world and the leading export economy in the world. So they gain benefits from the World Trade Organization by that categorization. And you should also know that there's a congressman from Wisconsin, Tom Tiffany, who has actually introduced legislation in the Congress to withdraw U.S. support to have the United States withdraw from the World Trade Organization. which I think would be a very good thing to actually occur. Can you show the next slide, please? Okay, now, in my view, there may indeed be a Mar-a-Lago Accord at some point in the future, but it's not something that's going to occur immediately, and it's not going to occur just on the basis of tariffs. What's needed beyond tariffs is a new Bretton Woods system, a new world credit system to replace the existing system, which is contrary to the initial conception of Franklin Roosevelt. And I think one of the critical things which is occurring in the world today is the negotiations between President Trump and President Putin of Russia, as mediated through these two gentlemen on the right, Steve Witkoff, and on the left, Kirill Dmitriev of Russia. And the issue here is not just Ukraine. That's definitely very, very important, bringing that war to an end. And the only obstacle to that right now is the combination of the British and the French, who formed a new Entente Cordiale. The initial one led us to World War I, in support of Zelensky this time. If that combination can be thwarted, then we can get a peace in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, which would be extraordinarily important. Not just in terms of that war, but in terms of a broader issue of collaboration between Russia and the United States. And if that occurs, then that could become the fulcrum, the pivot point for bringing about an agreement, not just with Russia, but with China and also with India. I think arriving in an agreement with India will not be so difficult because President Modi has a very good relationship with President Trump. And of course, President Trump believes that he can actually arrive at an agreement with President Xi of China and would like to actually meet with President Xi, as opposed to what's happening right now, which is the wolf lawyers of the Chinese foreign ministries are on the warpath and are not particularly open to the discussion which is necessary. And go back to what Bretton said earlier, that what President Trump is doing is adding another leg to the stool that Alexander Hamilton used of funding the new nation, and developing its manufacturing, and that is to negotiate. So I think the issue here is a negotiation, and these two individuals are playing a critical role. Next slide. I think there's one more. And that's just a picture of one of the meetings that that Witkoff has had with President Putin of Russia. And I think we're really at a critical point, obviously, in those negotiations. But what's at stake is something, as I said, even bigger than Ukraine per se. What's at stake is, can we create a new financial system? Many have said, you can take that down now, Tony. Many have said that after the breakdown of the Bretton Woods system, what we have is an international financial system, which is actually a non-system. And there have been various accords that have taken place over the years, but short of going back to creating a new Bretton Woods system, we haven't really had an agreed upon system throughout the world. There are some who say, well, there is a system, but it was imposed by China when they devalued the currency in 1994. But I think that that may very well, that is the case, that they devalued their currency in 1994, and that was part of the move towards outsourcing, globalization, and the hollowing out of our industry in this country. But if you just focus on that, you lose sight of a bigger picture, which is that the British were opposed to the Bretton Woods system from the very beginning. John Maynard Keynes, who was representative of the Bank of England and a follower of Thomas Malthus and of the British East India Company, had put forward a concept at Bretton Woods, which Franklin Roosevelt rejected. Part of that proposal was that the original Bretton Woods system would be run by the British and the United States, which meant that the British would actually have run it directly. Roosevelt rejected that and adopted the policy with some amendments put forward by Harry Dexter White. And that system worked very well. After World War II, there was reconstruction throughout the world, and the only problems with that system were a result of its dilution by the British through their channels of influence with Harry S. Truman and in the Eisenhower administration. But I think what you have to look at is that after Nixon took the dollar of gold, you had a government of Jimmy Carter, which was controlled by the Trilateral Commission. Not only was Carter a member of the Trilateral Commission, but Brzezinski was a member of the Trilateral Commission. Paul Volcker, who became head of the Federal Reserve, was a member of the Trilateral Commission. And it was in that period, 1976 to 1980, before Reagan came into office, that the globalization and the outsourcing began in earnest. And it was Paul Volcker who led the way in destroying the U.S. industry with usurious interest rates of as high as 20%. And it was Paul Volcker who put forward the Trilateral Commission policy of the controlled disintegration of the U.S. economy. So this destructive non-system, so-called, was imposed on the world in that period of 1976 to the year 1980. And then, of course, with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, you had a further impetus towards globalization with the idea of creating a unipolar world now that the Soviets didn't exist. And this was the focus of a book by Fukuyama called The End of History and the Last Man. So what you have to recognize is that as with the COVID epidemic, China played a role, certainly, in covering up the lab leak. But who was it that was funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab? It was people associated with Mr. Fauci in the U.S. So you have to keep that in mind also in terms of what's happened with the financial system. China may seem to have benefited, but in the long run, they're in a real dilemma, and they need to jettison their attachment to climate change, to free trade, and also to some of the monetary ideas of John Maynard Keynes. It should be recalled that the head of the Bank of China, who was in that position longer than anyone else, he's retired now. His name was Shao Chuan. I may not have gotten the last name pronounced exactly right, but in 2009 he wrote a book on reform of the international monetary system, in which he said that Harry Dexter White was wrong, and in hindsight, Keynes was correct. And so the Chinese really have to rethink that, because Roosevelt's policy is the right policy, and that's what we have to return to in this period. Now, let me just go through some of these other policies that were just a little bit more about some of these, some of the papers that have been put forward, the ones that I referred to by Brenner on towards the new Bretton Woods Agreement, Judy Shelton, the case for a new international monetary system. The strength of these two works, in my view, is they call for a return to exchange rate stability. That is rejecting the floating exchange rates that were imposed back in the early 1970s and going to a fixed exchange rate. Both Brenner and also Judy Shelton called for return to a fixed exchange rate. And this is, I think, very important because you can't have a stable global situation without a fixed exchange rate. And in the case of Bretton Woods, it meant that the dollar was the international reserve currency. Other currencies had a fixed exchange rate in respect to the dollar, and the dollar itself was pegged to a gold reserve system. In other words, to a parity, it was worth the price, market price of what it cost to produce gold. At that time, was $35. So you need that stability in the world system. We haven't had that. Just to give you one example, I thought Brenner's article was very interesting because he pointed out that most of the hundreds of trillions of dollars in derivatives contracts would disappear if you have a fixed exchange rate once again, because they are bets on the floating exchange rates. So those bets would no longer be needed. A company or a country would not have to hedge what will be the value of the currency that is agreed to in the contract down the road. They won't have to make derivatives bets, because there'll be a fixed exchange rate, and they can count on that. And the basic idea of currency stability is that will lower the cost of production. You don't have to make these derivative bets, and all of the speculation will no longer be necessary. At least in this case, at least in respect of the floating exchange rates. There's other kinds of speculation that go on too, which need to be reduced. So I think that is very important. Now, Brenner doesn't talk about pegging it to a gold reserve system. Shelton does, and what she says is that it's very interesting. She's published by the von Mises Foundation, but one of her criticisms of the floating exchange rate is that it was Milton Friedman in the Chicago School, and of course George Shultz, who introduced the floating exchange rate, was associated with the Chicago School. It was they who advocated the floating exchange rate, Milton Friedman. What she says about Trump is that what she quotes from Trump. Trump said, bringing back the gold standard would be very hard to do, but boy, would it be wonderful. We'd have a standard on which to base our money. So you can see that it's a very difficult task to get agreement on this, given that it's been over maybe close to 55 years since the U.S. abandoned the gold reserve system. But you can see that Trump is open to that, just as he was open in his first term to Glass-Steagall and the American system of political economy. That's what he advocated. That's what he's committed to. And the other aspect of Judy Shelton is that she points out that you need that. She said that Trump's economic imperative now is to initiate reform both at the Federal Reserve and in conjunction with international community to redefine monetary relations. And of course, the President Trump has signaled his complete commitment to the U.S. dollars remaining as the international reserve currency. And I think that what's got to happen is that we've got to move towards to a fixed exchange rate and go back to gold. That's what has to happen. Now, it's interesting because elements of the solution are expressed if you looked at all the people who were discussing these matters, but not all of them are for instance, are calling for fixed exchange rates and returning to gold reserve standard. Besant has not done that, for instance, so far. So I think we have to have it's very important that element be introduced. Maybe it's there in the background, because these are particular individuals who have a relationship with President Trump, but President Trump is his own man, and he has the cards, and he doesn't. He has a poker face, and he's not going to disclose necessarily what he's actually thinking. But we can see that these ideas are on the table at this point. Now, Tony mentioned, and I mentioned also, Steve Moran, who's now chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, and the main thing that he, among others, emphasized is this idea that that basically the Chinese are have an export surplus. Their entire economy is driven by this export surplus, and that what's necessary through the use of tariffs is to negotiate to have them shift their economic model so they don't have such a surplus. In the original Bretton Woods Agreement, you could, as drafted by Harry Dexter White, it was emphasized. I'll just read from him. He said, the cardinal principle is a country must, in the long run, buy only as much goods and services as it sells. And I think also vice versa. In other words, the idea was to bring about equilibrium in the global system, and the surpluses are actually detrimental to that. What Moran actually proposes is that, if necessary, that part of a deal with China to level the playing field would be to put China's U.S. Treasury portfolio in escrow, because in President Trump's first term, there was an agreement between China and the United States, and under phase one, China was supposed to purchase $200 billion in goods. But with COVID, and then with the rigged election in 2000, with President Trump no longer president, China just walked away from that agreement. They did not honor it. So what Moran emphasizes is that you have to have some means of making sure that they stick with their agreement. But Moran, he's obviously in an important position as chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, but in his discussion, there's no mention of exchange rate stability, gold reserve system whatsoever. And I must also say that many of the individuals who are weighing in on this question do not have a view which Lyndon LaRouche put forward of a four powers agreement, a Treaty of Westphalia approach. The Treaty of Westphalia is the treaty that ended the 30 Years' War in Europe from 1618 to 1648. And its principle was that every nation should act to the advantage or benefit of the other. It's a Christian principle that that's what you should do. And if you do that, it's the idea that in giving you receive, that the other nation will see that you're acting actually to their benefit, not just to their disadvantage. And then that's the basis for getting an agreement, which is actually in the mutual interest of all. And so this is not the view of some of the people who are putting forward conceptions of restructuring the global trading system, which is what Moran is talking about, just the trading system. He's not putting forward a restructuring of the financial system in a new Bretton Woods. So another individual who was put forward a document, which is Russell Napier. He wrote something called America, China, and the Death of the International Monetary Non-System. And he's the one who argues that China imposed an international monetary order in 1994 when they devalued their currency. His view is that the prospect of China and U.S. agreeing on a new Bretton Woods system is highly unlikely. And therefore, what he puts forward is an international monetary system that's reformed around a, quote, non-Chinese bloc. So this would be similar to the Cold War, because although Russia was at the Bretton Woods conference in 1944 and ratified it, the initial statement, it never joined the Bretton Woods system, perhaps because Roosevelt died and they did not really trust the combination of Churchill and Truman. But this is what would be created if you did this. So, you'd have the world in two blocks. So it's clearly, if you want to have stability in the world, prosperity and peace, you've got to come up with an agreement which involves these four powers as the initiating group of nations, although the new system itself should be open to any sovereign nation state. And that's important because, for instance, Europe there are no sovereign nation states with the European Union presently. But the basic ideas should be open to all nations in the world, including the BRICS nations, many of which actually attended the initial Bretton Woods conference. Now, what I think you'll see, particularly from President Trump's actions and from Besson's report, as well as some of the other individuals, President Trump's concept is certainly open to gold. It's oriented towards creating a manufacturing superpower in the United States, once again, having fair reciprocal trade as opposed to free trade of the Adam Smith sort. He categorically rejects the pseudo, it's not even pseudo, it's just fraudulent science of climate change, the green ideology, and talks about nuclear power and gas fossil fuels as opposed to what the World Bank and the IMF have been advocating, which is appropriate technology, which is green forms of energy production, which are intermittent at best, depending on wind and solar conditions. They're not conducive to actual industrialization. And this is in contrast to many of the ideas that were put forward back around 2008. There were when Lyndon LaRouche was campaigning actively for New Bretton Woods. There were various ideas that were put forward, all of them advocating the policies of John Maynard Keynes. There was one individual, Yanis Varoufakis, who was the former Greek finance minister, educated in Britain, moved to Australia, became an Australian citizen, and he basically argued, would Keynes' discarded plan be more appropriate for our post-2008 multipolar world? And this Varoufakis actually formed an organization with Bernie Sanders called Common Blueprint for an International New Deal in 2018. And what they did is they basically stole all the language of Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal, and turned it into a green New Deal. They called for an international green New Deal. They called for a European Glass-Steagall. They called for a Manhattan Project to create green cities. So they just betrayed Roosevelt's actual concept. stole his language and put forward this horrible conception, which Bernie Sanders is still pushing to this day. Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of Britain, at that point called for a new Bretton Woods, but for him it meant globalization, free trade, and he was opposed to a fixed exchange rate. Same with Nicolas Sarkozy of France. And also, as I mentioned, the former governor of the Bank of China endorsed Keynes in a paper he wrote in 2009. So what is a breath of fresh air is that although not perfect in terms of public expression, the discussion of Bretton Woods by circles around President Trump rejects all of this nonsense and is actually attempting to get a concept of a new Bretton Woods that would be beneficial to the entire world, that would involve other countries, and not create blocks like the Cold War did under the impetus of Churchill. And so I think what I want to do, just in conclusion, is to mention a few things mention Lyndon LaRouche's actual concept. This is expressed in the two books that I cited earlier, The Four Powers, printed in 2018, and my Beware the British East India Company towards an alliance between the United States, Russia, China, and India to finally defeat the British Empire. But here are the key principles of LaRouche's view of a new Bretton Woods. First, national sovereignty. That you have to have respect for national sovereignty. That means you will have countries with different traditions, different governmental systems, but they have national sovereignty, and you respect that. That's fundamental to being able to create a new, just economic system in the world. And that's also entails the approach of, as I mentioned now a couple of times, of the Treaty of Westphalia. You have to act to the advantage of the other. What will be mutually beneficial to all nations? That's the only way you're going to ever get agreement. Why would anybody agree to an approach which is one-sided, which is chauvinist in some way, and that is just it goes to what Besson said. First, America first does not mean America alone. We want to help other nations as well. Now, another aspect which is not mentioned really at all in any of the proposals thus far is the idea of a national credit system. Under the American system, Alexander Hamilton created a national bank, which extended credit to manufacturing in the country. So we funded the manufacturing not only by tariffs, but by a national bank that extended credit, low interest credit for manufacturing and infrastructure development. That's how the nation was built. Lincoln did something similar with his greenback policy to fund manufacturing during the period of the Civil War. Roosevelt did something also similar with his Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which extended credit to fund manufacturing and infrastructure throughout the country. And one of Lyndon LaRouche's proposals is that essentially that what you want to do is create a system of how does he put it? It's a fraternal system of Hamiltonian credit systems. Each nation, sovereign nation, has the capacity to issue its own currency notes, which are backed by gold, and those notes can then fund manufacturing and infrastructure, construction, and so forth. It should also be noted that this can be used to fund capital exports. If we want to reverse the hollowing out of our nation, we not only want to produce for domestic consumption, but we also want to produce for export. And of course, under the Reconstruction Finance Corporation of Roosevelt, you had the Export-Import Bank, which did precisely that. The system has to be anti-entropic. That is, it is not based upon limits to resources. Man has the creative capacity to redefine the resource base. We can develop fusion power. We can explore and colonize the solar system and eventually the universe. Elon Musk is absolutely right in that respect. So it's anti-entropic. We don't believe that everything is going to run down. That's a false concept. It's the idea behind climate change. It's the idea behind the conception that the carrying capacity of the Earth is only 1 billion people, which means that the other 7 billion people can't be sustained, and that's the biggest genocide that would ever occur in human history, if you believe that nonsense. So the new Bretton Woods system has to be anti-entropic. And the basic idea is that it has to be initiated by the United States. This was insisted upon by Lyndon LaRouche. The United States is the nation which has to do this. And in that sense, what we need to do is to create what Lyndon LaRouche referred to as an American century. That doesn't mean imperialism. That means a century which is dominated by American system political economy, adopted by all to the benefit of all. That's what we need. So, and the basic idea is that it should be initiated by the United States, and that's what I think needs to be done right now. That's what Lyndon LaRouche would advocate, that we should be proposing this to Russia, to President Xi of China, to President Modi of India, and that these 4 countries should create an initial organizing committee to put together a draft of a new Bretton Woods system based on these principles. And in terms of the U.S., Judy Shelton mentioned that President Trump has also an opportunity to reform the Federal Reserve System, which we have. And what's really needed is some way in which the Fed is brought under, becomes an agency of the U.S. Treasury. The U.S. Treasury then should issue U.S. Currency notes for real production, like the National Bank did under Hamilton. And remember, that bank was endorsed by George Washington, our first president of the United States. And it actually was critical, along with tariffs, in developing the nation. So this has to be discussed within the Trump administration. And this has to be acted upon. And again, the idea is that we have to issue these U.S. Treasury currency notes backed by gold, and the gold should be valued at market price, at a parity price, what it costs to produce the gold. Now, and I think this is, I guess what I'll just conclude with is some of the things that, like, again, which Harry Dexter White wrote in his draft of the Bretton Woods system. That you cannot have that. Actually, what he writes is that no nation can unilaterally change the value of its exchange rate on currencies. That this is absolutely critical for global economic stability. It's possible to revalue your currency, to have a devaluation, as China did. And actually, Steve Moran is talking about a devaluation of the U.S. dollar. But under the Bretton Woods system, you had to get it approved by 3/4 of the members of the Bretton Woods system before you could do it. The other thing which is important is the original Bretton Woods system considered it to be an unfair trade policy for a nation to subsidize its exports, which is something that China does. So that also would have to be ruled out. And you would, but I think the key thing is that we create a a new Bretton Woods system based on the original concepts of Roosevelt and his aide Harry Dexter White. Reject the ideas of John Maynard Keynes, who's a Malthusian. He called for basically an artificial currency as opposed to the dollar based on gold. It's called the Bancor. And this idea was rejected thoroughly by Harry Dexter White. What he said is that we already have international medium exchange, gold, and that no new international unit was necessary. And on the question of free trade, what Harry Dexter White's draft said was assumptions essential to the belief that free trade policy is ideal are not valid. They are unreal, unsound. So the new system that we need to build now, and it's crucial that we do this right now. Otherwise, we are gambling with World War III, and we're gambling with a global financial collapse. The principles involved include getting the 4 key nations to recognize the invalidity of free trade and the validity of fair and reciprocal trade, the invalidity of the climate change policy, which is actually a population reduction policy to 1 billion people. The invalidity of the idea of another currency, such as the Bancor that Keynes put forward. And there have been people associated with the BRICS who have looked for such a currency. It hasn't emerged yet, and I don't think it's going to. But those things have to be rejected by the participants of the 4 powers in initiating this new system. And there has to be greater clarity about the overall perspective within the Trump administration. If a proposal is going to be made, and if a valid new Bretton Woods system is to be created. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Will.